Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, we all celebrated Christmas with a big Suns win. Now the question becomes, can they keep it up? How do they keep it up? And is there any message beyond play that way every single time? Next.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing and a credentialed Suns media member. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your Friday. Don't forget Locked On Suns, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So click that follow or subscribe button and do what thousands of other Suns fans have already done. Become an everydayer. Get locked on to the Phoenix Suns right here each and every day. Today's episode brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Joining me as always from the Wild West Valley, my fellow Suns credentialed media member and a special guest. Ben, this is the first guest we've ever had since we started doing the show together, I believe. Is
Together.
Yes.
I had Espo on my own a couple, month and a half ago, but it was very, very lonely having to just do it by myself. So I'm happy that you're here.
It is Erik Ruby of PHNX Sports, the wonderful host over there, does Sun Devils content, but we're talking Suns today. How are you doing, Erik? How are you feeling after that awesome Christmas night win?
Well, I'm feeling special considering I'm the first. It's not usual I'm the first. A little left out because I'm not a credentialed media member because I had to watch the game from a couch. But man, what a day. It was so nice because you go into that game expecting dread and then they delivered what you were asking for 2 days ago. And then you're kind of left going like, whoa, let's go.
I know. And the question just has to become, how do they keep it up? Like, this team's too good. They've done this to us too many times. And so, people can check out the recap show from last night. I broke down some of the nuts and bolts of the moments that spurred the win and adjustments and beating the Nuggets after losing to them on Monday. And maybe some of that will come up tonight or today. But I guess the place I kind of want to start is capitalizing off of that Christmas idea. It is a big game for all these players, and it's a big stage, and it's a big opponent that they just lost to, not to mention that, eliminated them 2 years ago and all that sort of stuff. Ben, do you think this was just the Christmas atmosphere? Like, is Friday just going to feel like the 3-game losing streak all over again because it's not December 25th with, ESPN in town?
Well, I think there was a few things to last night, and I think the biggest thing was 2 nights ago, I think it was a little unfair to kind of everyone go fire and brimstone on the Suns because that Nuggets team, it was Tyson and it was Strother at points in that game, just absolutely annihilating the Suns. And of course, they just shot tremendously from 3. It wasn't really fair. I thought it was just a hodgepodge of all things that could be disaster for the Suns. And we had people saying, from other different outlets, this team's got to be done or they got to blow it up. I saw some people were like, come to Jesus moments. I think last night was a collective, okay, the Nuggets are not as hot as they were the other night where they were insane from 3-point land. And I think it's also the Suns read all the newspapers and everything going insane. And I think it was also just hey, this is Christmas Day. This is a chance for all of us to show the collective NBA world what we can do. And I think you saw a lot of just extra oomph for everyone out there looking for this team to have yet just that breakout game. And I think last night was even more so than any of that. I think that was a chance to turn the tide again because it was a big game, because it was Christmas. And I think the Suns have a chance to build off of this. And what you had kind of mentioned before, alluding to the question of what was it? I don't know. And I think you had mentioned it before in the tease where it was everyone just kind of tried a little harder. And I think a lot of that came from the rookies, J.O., those types of guys, those energy guys. That's what we needed to see last night. And I think once you get Booker back, you have some real questions of toggling where people should go, including the question of hey, maybe this team's just better with the big 2 in the starting lineup rather than a big 3. But I think it was all those things, man. I think it was they read the headlines. The Nuggets were not as hot as they were the other day. And also, it's just Christmas Day. Everyone's excited and an ability to show everyone what this team can make up at a national scale. So that's where I was at with it.
Erik, Ben has Katie busting out the New York Times on Christmas morning at the coffee table. He said newspapers. What do you think it was?
Probably his Twitter feed. I would assume that is his newspaper, especially in light of recent events. And that's kind of an evergreen comment when it comes to KD, as recent events on Twitter basically are every other day for him. But to be honest with you, with this team and where they're at, like mentality wise, I kind of want them looking at that, because what they've shown is that they can channel that energy. And what I don't want them to act like is they could just flip a switch on and off, because yeah, they technically have the talent to do it. And I've said it on PHNX Suns so often that talent's never been a problem with this team. And it's not even just about effort. It's about like really settling into your role as well. And Ben's point with the big two in the lineup, I think there is an argument to say that things just get a little more simple when you have two score first players that are on there that know the offense are going to run through them, and everybody else around them fits into a certain role. Tyus Jones facilitating, scoring a little bit more without one of those big three members, but he could pick up that slack. Yusuf Nurkic just rebounding, and I could have used maybe less than 4 threes the other night, but I thought besides that, he played really well within himself. And then, of course, you look at Ryan Dunn, who's just defense, try to grab rebounds, try to be the energy guy. A lot of that slots in more simply when there's just two. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if there's two, if there's three, if Dunn is starting, if Dunn's on the bench. If they just show up and pretend like they can roll the ball out there and beat any other team in the NBA, then they're not going to have any deep success in the playoffs. And that's what I wanted to see is, like last night when Jokic was off the floor, they went into attack mode, right? Like I need to see that on a consistent level where they show up and they go, we're not just here to prove people wrong on Christmas. We're not just here to prove people wrong once they doubt us after we play bad. We're here to prove everybody on every single day that we're one of the best teams in the NBA, because I do think they can reach that level if they play with that concerted effort and concentration that they had on Christmas.
Yeah, you saw it from the jump. I think the two things that hit me right away with it were KD, fair or not, like, I understand there's nights where he has an offensive burden that limits him. He's far from the only superstar player that can come and go on the defensive end, but that is such a bellwether for this team to me on a night-to-night basis. If he's making plays in the passing lanes, rim protecting kind of from the weak side, and all the things we know he can do with how much space he can fill in his IQ, that tells you where this team is. And last night it was there from the jump. On the other end, with the other star, Beal was hunting his shot all night. From moment one to the end of the game, he was coming for blood, and that has not always been true. Even on Monday, I believe, or maybe it was Saturday, the game where he took 2 shots in the second quarter after a strong start, there just can't be those lulls, and on Christmas night there wasn't. And Beal obviously put together two-way, one of the best games of his season, but defensively, it's kind of been more consistent. It was really the offense that came around. I think the comment that KD made post-game actually proves exactly what both of you guys are saying, even if he may not have intended it. And I talked about this on the recap show. He said, when you are missing some of your best players, your identity has to change, right? I would maybe tweak it. For this team, when they are missing their best players, one of them at least, they have an identity at all, right? Like that seems to be true here, where he said, and you could see it with how they were defending Jokic, which was a big thing coming off of Monday. They're pressing him. That first bucket of the game, Beal forces that turnover, leak out to KD for the dunk, and they just brought that intensity and forcefulness. They limited a great offense to 100 points. Maybe that's only their identity because they can start Ryan Dunn and because they have to. They don't have the offensive punch that Book provides. But I'll take that over what we were seeing at times when this group was even healthy and not knowing what their identity was at all. So, Ben, yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, which is just they had a clear idea of how they wanted to play basically by necessity, and they did it, and they won the game. And sometimes it's that simple.
Yeah, and I want to harp on this again in a little bit in just a second here when we get to, what more things have to happen with the Suns team. But I think the biggest thing, and I was texting you this last night, Brendon, when you were at the game, and I was lazily sitting at home watching it, but I was texting you and I was like, I just don't get it until you kind of sleep on it and kind of think about it. Like, why is this offense so complex now? Why is it the ball? There was one point where Beal missed a three, but the ball hit everyone on the court, and the Denver Nuggets defense just had no idea what to do, and Beal had an open shot. But those were the kind of threes that we needed to see, or those kind of offensive opportunities that we needed to see, that we did see early on in the season. I don't think it's so much about missing a player or injuries. I think it really is about, and you hit it right on the head, this team has no idea what they are. And even last night, they got up 36 threes. Probably want to see them hit that 40 range with the three-point attempts, and they weren't awesome with it. But I saw an offensive identity last night where they're getting out in transition, whether it was Beal blocking whoever it is, and alley-oops the other direction. Like, that's the way this team has to win. They are not going to beat teams in staggering half-court offenses. We're not getting out in transition, not getting Beal and Kevin Durant in transition, or these middies that they need to mix in with the three-point shot. It's last night we saw something that I don't think we have seen in about 2 or 3 weeks, and it also just adds to the energy of this team. I saw the Suns, and I tweeted out last night, it was the most energy I've seen them play with in over a month. That is what I have to see the rest of the season, where you get out in these transition breaks and then you're able to hit an open three. You're able to swing the ball around. And we'll talk about it again in a little bit in just a second here, what that means to me, at least in my eyes. But this team, we saw an identity last night, and that was an identity that I hadn't seen since the first 10 games of the season. So that's where I would be with it.
All right. So last season, oh, go ahead, Erik.
Well, so on that, there's one game this season that if you look at one player, and I feel like it can just apply to everything, and that's the Minnesota game. Obviously, the push off with Julius Randle. We're not going to talk about that, but Devin Booker, that game, that was like the first game he got out of that funk that everybody was really looking at him for. And you notice when his offense started dropping, his defense started picking up. And I do think that's a theme with this whole team. You saw it, like Bradley Beal getting in his scoring groove, I feel like helped them on the defensive end, right? And when you have a team like this where you are so reliant on your star scoring, you are so reliant on your offensive output, like having that defensive energy in there as well is so important, which is why when you said Beal needs to be shot hunting a little bit more, like not just for his offensive end, but for his defensive end as well, there is like a psychological aspect to that I've noticed with this team this year. And I think that does lead towards them building the identity, because I just don't think it's their identity yet. I think it should be, but we have to take the baby steps to get there and prove it.
This was definitely step one. And as I was going to say, last season, kind of a surprisingly or maybe unsurprisingly mirror image where they are surprisingly competitive. They didn't beat the Mavericks, but they were like, okay, things might be turning around. They get healthy right afterward, and the season turned around. Can this be that jumping off point this season as well? We'll look forward to building off of some of these baby steps from Christmas night next. First, today's show brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth, and these generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply for product-specific disclosures. Visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, back here. Erik Ruby's joining us. Ben's back. We're talking Suns, Nuggets, and looking forward to, again, that Mavs team that kind of provided this jumping off point a year ago on Christmas, where suddenly Beal was back again and the team was able to stay healthy, string some games together, and convince us all they could actually win in the playoffs. And then we were proven wrong. But maybe think that this year will be different. And I think we talked about KD's response post-game. Erik, the point you were making about that identity and kind of the connection between the two ends is exactly where I wanted to go. Because Mike Budenholzer's reaction post-game was basically exactly that. The most like animated or kind of, wink wink that you'll ever see Coach Bud get came last night, where he said, it's like, I don't even remember the exact terminology. He was like, it's so convenient, or it's so, such a coincidence that when we buckle in and focus on the game plan, focus on defense, focus on bringing intensity in the ways that we know we need to, that we are somehow also more locked in on offense. And I think that, like, he doesn't give us a lot, Bud, but that was very, very telling to me. And I think a message to the team as well, that it has to be all of it. And the two things are connected. And when this team's at its best, it's because they're embracing all of it, and the confidence and the energy, it all stems from there. So it's not like too reductive to say that effort stuff is kind of the whole point here, because of how it flows into everything else. Ben, we had a therapy session on after Monday night's game. It sounds like you recovered a little bit since then. But
I mean,
does this convince you that it can be turned, that the page can be turned after how ugly it was when we were calling it rock bottom and talking about a lot of, scary things?
Yeah, I was frustrated on whatever Tuesday night it was for the Suns, but I wasn't fire and brimstone where a lot of people were like, blow it up. I was at blow it up last year when I thought they were going to keep Vogel and, saying things on the radio where I was like, I think it's done. We have to see this through. There's nowhere else to go. And so last night, I thought you saw something that I think is very clear for this team. I'm still not at blow it up. I'm still at let's go for it. I might have my opinions changed again on what that looks like, whether it's going after Butler or going after the savior of Suns Twitter, Nick Richards, or whoever it is. But I think for me, it is staring the Suns right at the face what this team is. And I think it is as clear as day as like when AJ Puck should have been the closer for the Diamondbacks, or firing Drew Petzing with the
AJ
Cardinals.
Puck name drop in a
yeah,
Suns
exactly.
podcast.
That's how extensive this knowledge is. No, I think it's very clear what the Suns need to do. This is a big two. This is no longer a big three. I think what works best for this team, like I am really ready to hit the button on this. With Booker, with KD, this team can win games. With Booker and Beal, not necessarily. With Beal and KD, this team can look really, really good. Beal, I think, is really suited to be the 1 or 2 on a bad team or a bench unit. I think you need to go to Beal and have this conversation of, listen, man, which we can get to in a second, like, hey, we can trade you to Miami and you can go there. But if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You have 2 options. We can trade you. Let's say that option's on the table. Or you can go to the bench. You can pick whichever one you want. You can keep your kids here. You can go to the bench. I think that's what the Suns need to do, because last night when you inject that Ryan Dunn into this equation where you don't need to get him any shots. Yes, he's going to shoot the occasional 3 when he's wide open and he's got to hit those. But I think the offense, man, it just flows so much better when there are 2 guys that are consistent shot creator guys. And it's why I put out a couple of weeks ago with you, Brendon. It's like, Tyus Jones, I think, is a better third option scoring the basketball, because we don't care if he gets his points, but if we need him, he can do so. I think it's very clear what this Suns team is. You got to move Beal to the bench. Doesn't mean he still doesn't play 35, 40 minutes a game. It doesn't mean he still doesn't get $50 million a year. But I think you got to inject Royce O'Neal, or in my opinion, Ryan Dunn, into this lineup, get bigger, get immediately better defensively, and still put Beal in situations where he can thrive, because it looks like the most confused person outside of Yusuf Nurkic at times offensively is Beal, because it seems like he's trying to find his shot in the first 5 seconds, but he's being such a sacrifice to the team that immediately after, when that doesn't happen, he's kicking the ball to someone else. So I think the Suns are clearly seeing an identity here, and I think we're all dancing around. And I think when I say we, I mean, I think the Suns are dancing around what it should look like. And I think that's what it looks like, man. There needs to be a clear hierarchy.
What do you think, Erik?
Well, I actually don't disagree with Beal on the bench. And it's a tough conversation to have, because I think that initially the people who are anti-Beal on the bench turn it into like, you're demoting him. And you know what? Like, technically speaking, that's how basketball is, right? If you're a bench player, if you're a starter, usually the starters are better than bench players. But there are unique cases in NBA history, and Bradley Beal is not Manu Ginobili as a one-to-one comparison, but let's explore that for a second, right? Where if Manu Ginobili started for those Spurs teams where he came off the bench, like, they'd still be good, but the fit is just a little bit clunkier. And I think clunky is the right word, because it can work at sometimes with those 3 on the court. And like you saw it in the Lakers game, when they all came back from injury and they played like 30 minutes and they stepped on the Lakers' throats, it was like, wow, this really works. But Ben, you're right. When Bradley Beal plays with bench players, when Bradley Beal in his mind deep down knows that he's that dude that needs to go off and score tonight, he needs to have that killer mentality. That's the best version of him. So if I'm approaching Bradley Beal, I'm not approaching it from a perspective of you're a bad basketball player, because he's not, or you're not a worthy starter on any team. Bradley Beal, talent-wise, should be a starter on every single team in the NBA. But when you talk about this specific situation with the pieces that you have, we can get the best out of you, Bradley Beal, by putting you in a different situation, playing starters minutes, but with a different allocation. Plus, I think there's something to be said. Some of the best bench scorers in NBA history, look at a Jamal Crawford, say, I love to sit back, analyze the game, and know when these moments and when to pick my spots and kind of feel it out. I think that's been Brad's biggest problem is when do I find my moments? When do I attack? And it was one of the first things you said, Brendon, where it was, hey, on Christmas, he knew what he was doing. He was decisive and he was being quick with his decisions. That's not all the time. Make it simpler for him, and then make it simpler for Devin Booker as well, who's been better from the poor stretch that we saw him earlier in the season, but he's still not at that level that we know he can get to, which is the best two guard in the NBA. It's a tough conversation to have because Bradley Beal has the $50 million tag around him, and I don't know how he's going to respond to that. But what I loved from Coach Bud in his comments last night and from his comments that he first had at Suns Media Day is he's not BSing. He's looking you dead in the eye and telling you what you need to do and what you need to do better. I wouldn't be shocked if eventually that's a conversation that's had, but I just don't know when and how likely that's going to be.
Me neither. And I think the funny part of this is to be having a conversation after a game where he was awesome, right? It's like kind of doing the things that we're asking. But again, it is just going to come back to fit. So I guess in terms of when, you got to hope that you're able to string together some of the healthy stretches. Otherwise, it's kind of a shot in the dark. It's a guessing game. If you're saying we're going to make a decision before we've even seen something, that's really hard to do. Obviously, they may not have the luxury of seeing it. We don't know. That's a conversation for a different day. I do just find it funny that he set the energy with exactly the style of play and the identity and all the things we were kind of talking about to start the show. Beal was a big part of creating that. And then we're saying he doesn't quite fit with doing that. And it's one of the things that makes you kind of want to pull your hair out about this team.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to step over you, Brendon, there for a second. I thought you were coming towards the end there. But let me just ask you this, Brendon. You're like saying like, oh, why are we having this conversation? Me and Erik are both saying he was, he's awesome last night. Why was he awesome? Why was he awesome? Was he awesome because he has more of a clear defined role of what he's doing? And I think if you have that conversation,
on offense, but there's two sides of the game, and he is still one of the team's only good perimeter defenders. And so that part of the fit, I do think gets glossed over a lot of the time, where, like I say, whether it's that first play of the game that he creates a turnover, whether it is, stepping up and I think taking seriously, hey, Michael Porter Jr. killed us on Monday. I don't want to let that happen. He still had a good game, but Beal got an assignment of a guy who has 6 inches on him and scorched them on Monday, and he did a better job and a more attentive job to deny Porter the kinds of looks that he was getting. So I think it is just one of those confusing things. I think in the meantime, though, Dunn has to keep starting. And I think you got to keep riding the energy guys that we saw make a big impact, whether it's when Booker gets until Booker gets back, and then you have to have a little bit of a different conversation because there's only room for so many players. But Dunn, Okogie, Morris, those guys sparked this win, feeding off of what the starters did, yes, but they were just as big of a part of why this win was so dominant from start to finish. So those guys have to keep playing, and I don't know. I don't know if there's any arguing that. Maybe it's more going small. I don't know how to make it work, but when those three are in there, I feel better, and that's kind of been true all season.
And I don't disagree with that. And just back to the Beal defense thing, I think there's no iteration with Bradley Beal on this roster that you can win without him being one of your top 3 most important players, right? Like it bench starting whatever role he's in, Bradley Beal is going to be the 3rd most important player for the Phoenix Suns to win a championship if he is on this roster, right? So that perimeter defense that he brings, if let's say he's off the bench when Devin Booker's back and it's Ryan Dunn there, like you still have that perimeter defense, and having a guard that can go out there and put that kind of impact in is not a button that you can push off the bench, right? Like Monte Morris is a smart defender. He's not a great defender, right? Even if Tyus Jones is playing with the bench unit, he's smart, but he's small. Bradley Beal can give you a different look there. It's tough because, again, I don't want to come off as like disrespectful to Bradley Beal. If anything, it's more respecting the certain things that he brings and wondering if it slots in differently to bring the most value, to get the most out of his $50 million contract. it's not an enviable situation that Mike Budenholzer is in. Like it's tough because you can make one of these moves and you can ruin the morale of a team that feels like it's just now getting its pep in its step. It's easy for us to sit here and say, push this button and bench him like 2K. And again, hand up, I'm the one who is exploring that conversation. But in an ideal world, if he's fully bought in and he brings everything that he can, Bradley Beal off the bench is still the third most important player on this team. It's just allocated a little bit differently where that importance comes from.
Yeah, it is good to have a coach, like you said, that from Jump Street has been the no nonsense guy, and he has put his decision making where his mouth is, so to speak, where he has shifted minutes. He has had a shorter leash with Yusuf Nurkic than Frank Vogel did. He has given rookies minutes over other guys and all the sorts of things and adjustments that I think Suns fans want to see. So if I trust anybody to do it, of the coaches that have come through here and had to deal with this new era of this team, it is Bud, but that doesn't make it easy, because it's funny. You said there's unique cases in NBA history, Eric, where this has happened. I would say there's a unique case ever where this has happened, and you named it, which is Manu Ginobili, and that's why we give him so much credit and the Spurs so much credit for pulling it off. I would struggle to find another one where a top 3 player on the team was not in the top 5 players in terms of what the starting lineup tells us. But 5 great games on Christmas. The Suns made us very happy. The biggest character in the NBA universe who did not actually compete at all on Christmas Day was Jimmy Butler, as all the festivities kicked off with a new report from Shams Charania at ESPN. We'll break down that update and the next thing we're looking for as it pertains to Jimmy Butler next. But first, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with a $250 bonus bet if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways to pick up a W this fall and winter. We all love betting on which players will score a touchdown, total points scored. Bet on the stuff you like to watch. Not only can you bet on who will win, but FanDuel has prop bets for touchdowns, over-unders for total points, and so much more. Here's how you get your 250 in bonus bets, all right? I know the NFL is fun, but just have some fun with the bonus bets. Start with the Grizzlies, who are hosting the Raptors at home on Thursday night by the time some of you are hearing this. If not, check the bowl schedule. There's always some lopsided results. You just want to get that easy win. Then have some fun down the stretch of the season with those NFL bets, futures in the NBA, all sorts of fun stuff. All at FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's close it out, guys. People care about the current team and feeling good. So we'll give a little bit of a rapid reaction here to what the future might hold as the Jimmy Butler saga continues to take twists and turns. Here was from the article version of what Shams reported on Wednesday morning that stuck out to me. And I'm honestly just going to ask you guys to make sense of it first, and then we'll talk about what might happen next, because it was equally confusing as much as it was news. Butler has not formally requested a trade, but is, quote, believed to be ready for his exit. I don't know what that means, but that's what it says. Then, later in the article, quote, teams have been informed that Butler intends to decline his player option and become a free agent in July. Now, that's more concrete, but also we already knew it. That's kind of been the underlying thing here the whole entire time. So, Ben, was this actually a new development that Shams got word of that led him to discuss it, or was this just ESPN's on TV all day and we have to say something? Because that is important context as people are trying to understand this situation.
Yeah, I think it sounds like Shams needed a story for NBA Christmas, the ESPN countdown stuff, and he just decided to rework. It was like one of those news aggregators that steal a report from someone and post it on Twitter, but just use different words and make it up.
Except
and make
he did it to himself.
Report. Yeah, except he did it to himself, so no one's actually mad at him. But that's what Shams just did yesterday, because when I read that because the big Twitter article tweet was, he wants to be out by February 6th or whatever it was. And then you read the actual thing, is like, well, he never really said that. It is clear through back channels that Jimmy would like to move on, but he hasn't gone to ownership about it. That's what I think is there's this toggling between Butler and the ownership. That's what I think it was.
I've heard a few people say that it's not going to get ugly like Minnesota did. Like I've heard reporters like put it that way. We all remember he invites Rachel Nichols to do an interview. He beats the starters with the backups in front of the owner watching at practice, and all the saga that eventually led him to Philly, and then he left Philly to go to Miami, and here we are. And I think the reason's pretty obvious, Eric, which is that he's not 30 anymore. He's in his mid-30s. This is the last contract he's going to get, and he kind of has to play nice up to a point. So I don't know what you thought of this update, but I'm ready for your thoughts on what has to change for us to finally get a change in this kind of stalemate where a bunch of news came out and then it's been basically nothing for 2 weeks.
Well, and I think that you guys kind of answered it yourself where it will probably have to get ugly, which I don't think it's going to, not just because Jimmy is in his mid-30s and is nearing the end of his career and quite frankly doesn't bring the same value that he brought when he was on a Minnesota team, when he was kind of dominating like these locker rooms. But I think just as big of a part of it is what locker room he's in. And that's the Miami Heat. Like, all due respect to the Minnesota Timberwolves and where they were at that point in their organization. But the Miami Heat do not bend to your will. The Miami Heat are not like Jimmy Butler's identity. No, Jimmy Butler came to the Heat because they had an identity. I know you can kind of throw up in your mouth a little bit when you hear how much people talk about Heat culture, but man, it's true. Like, it's genuinely true. And you see that when players go down and they get injured and they step up. The thing that has to happen for Jimmy Butler to get out of Miami is he has to make it uncomfortable, and somebody has to approach Miami with something that they're interested. And I don't think that's Bradley Beal. So you need to start hearing rumors, reports, whatever, that there's a third team genuinely interested in getting Bradley Beal, that Bradley Beal's interested in waiving his no trade clause to go to, and that somehow is willing to facilitate something to Miami that Miami wants so that Miami can send Jimmy. AKA, it's probably not going to happen. It's definitely not impossible, and a lot of people said the same thing about a Kevin Durant trade, and look at where we are right now at the end of 2024 with Kevin Durant on the Phoenix Suns. But there's a whole lot in there mixed in with contracts, age, and then the Miami Heat, Pat Riley of it all, that just really makes this difficult. So I'm not getting my hopes up, even though I do think that a Butler trade would help this team in a couple different ways, not in the health department, but in a couple other ways. And so until I hit that point where Jimmy Butler is holding out and making things uncomfortable for the Miami Heat, and for some reason, random team number 3 really wants Bradley Beal and really wants to send something of value to Miami, until then, this is just a really nice idea that, again, you can go press your 2K buttons on and hit that trade. Other than that, I don't see this happening unless those steps are taken.
Ben, what's the next domino you're looking for?
I think it's very interesting. And I am pointing the finger squarely at Erik, and a decent amount of people in the media industry here in Phoenix who think it is so unlikely that Butler could come to Phoenix. Maybe I'm on my own, but I just see it so often where someone says they want to go somewhere and they end up there. I think when you mess with someone's money, especially in the NBA where it's a lot of egos, I think Butler can and will, if he wants to be gone and knows he's not going to get paid, will make it ugly. Now, I think the reason why some of these things are starting to develop a little bit more slowly and maybe Butler is playing a little bit more nicer is I think the Suns know, and now I'm backtracking again, that I don't think Butler saves this team. I think the only way that this team gets fixed is they go after and improve the center position marginally with those picks. I think it's surprising when Jimmy Butler kind of gets thrown in that, well, okay, if you put Jimmy Butler in, you're still going to have Nurkic and you're still going to have those issues and you're still going to have some defensive issues, meaning guys are a little bit more smaller.
So, Ben, do you think Butler needs it more than the Suns? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think Butler needs it more than the Suns because of money-wise. I think the Suns know, man, that they've got the stars, they've got the scoring. I think they got to go elsewhere. And I think you just have to avoid the big fish where he's so much fun and he's so big and he's so talented. And I think you got to go improve in other directions. I understand why you guys think, or maybe not just lumping you and Brendon, why it's not going to happen, but I think it absolutely will happen if the Suns want it to happen. So long-winded way of saying that.
So you think it will, but maybe it shouldn't. I think that Butler doesn't need the Suns because I don't think the Suns are the only team that would pay him. And even even in free agency. And yes, maybe he appears to like want to come to Phoenix. I don't exactly have a great read on why other than the star power, but I just have confidence that even if it's in July, and it probably would have to be a sign and trade because nobody has cap space in the NBA anymore. I think it's only Brooklyn who's set to, and he's not going to go to Brooklyn. He could still, finagle his way to another team through a sign and trade then. I just don't think that there's a sense of urgency. And so maybe that's one of the things I'm waiting for is when we start to see the reports of such and such team would be interested in Butler in free agency but may not have the assets now. If you start to see those reports, then that's some back channeling about, hey, we can't trade for you. Sit tight in Miami. Let's talk again in the summer. Maybe that changes things. As for a third team, the Kings and De'Aaron Fox have entered the chat, so to speak, and I'm kind of monitoring that because I do think he is a very good fit in Miami if it comes to that. I don't know what that would look like, and we're not going to get into it now. But really the main thing I'm watching to wrap up is the Heat and how they play. I think that will dictate their sense of urgency on this whole thing the most. They have a big road trip in mid-January. They are basically right where the Suns are, 500, hanging on to one of those top 6 seeds or, in and out depending on the day. If they put together another win streak like they had going a couple of weeks ago, including beating the Suns, maybe things look different. If they suffer another injury or can't string together wins on that road trip or whatever it might look like, they probably feel a little differently as they head toward February 6th about whether to give up their best player and do a little bit of a reset. So just like we keep hearing the Suns are waiting, I think the Heat are waiting. And just what happens on the court is probably going to dictate a lot of this because Pat Riley will not bend to your will, but if it's in Pat Riley's interest,
sure,
he very well might. All right, that'll wrap us up. A big thank you to Erik, our first ever trio show with a guest, and we will be back for you. No, we won't. This is it. We'll be back for you next week. We got Suns Mavs on Friday. We've got Suns Warriors on Saturday. As always, if those games warrant it, we will have a bonus episode for you. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the Suns. Please try to. And we'll talk to you on Monday.